After e4, c6, knight c3, d5, knight f3, knight f6, e5, knight e4. We said we don't trade, so knight e2, and after bishop g4 we attack it, and we're still looking at the variation with bishop takes, pawn takes, and now knight c5, d4. In the previous examples we went through knight e4, knight e6, and so on. Let's go through knight e7 finally, and as quickly mentioned, e6 is the move now. And if knight moves away, best move is h4. Obviously we want to be able to play bishop h3 with knight a4, f4 ideas, and it's just going to be impossible for black to take the pawn in e6. That pawn is there to stay, and potentially taking f7. It depends. Obviously it wants to be supported by the knight in f4 and the bishop in h3. If black tries to take it, then it's going to get punished, because queen d6, then bishop f4 attacking the queen, and after queen takes, bishop h3 will win a piece, because black will be forced to sacrifice the knight in g4. So back in this position, let's not go through knight f6 now. Let's take the pawn and see how to exploit this. Now we play knight to f4 with the usual idea. What happens in this scenario, which we haven't seen so far? Queen to b6, getting the queen away from the attack on the knight. When the knight was going to go to e6, so that potentially if we play knight e6, black can play king f7. It's kind of difficult to tell what's going on here, although it's still good for white. But white's best move is c3, reinforcing the pawn chain. And after c5, the black queen is now defending e6, but here there's a pattern. When you have this type of pawn structure, these 4 pawns like this, and black only has these 2 backwards pawns, and the c5 pawn, which is the connection between these 2 and the rest of the pawns on the queen side, you can eliminate the c pawn, creating a pawn island, these 2, and after black takes, well, of course taking back with the queen will come with a pressure stamp of a white when white plays knight e6. Taking back with the knight, you can play b4. So this is the pattern you can go through. This will allow you to advance the pawns a lot. It does create a c3 backwards pawn, but you'll see what kind of advantage we have now, because after the knight moves again, white continues with h4 and the thematic bishop h3. And the black player has nowhere to castle. Knight a6 now, with the idea of castling, is met by bishop h3 obviously, and after knight to c7, protecting that pawn even further. There's much more defense now over that pawn. And here's the brilliant move: sacrifice, knight e6. So after take, we don't take back, we play queen takes, pawn in d5, so we lost the knight for 2 pawns, but we have a great attack, meaning this knight cannot move anywhere where he can keep defending the square d7. So if the knight moves somewhere, whatever, you're going to have 2 pieces like the queen and the bishop attacking d7, and the knight can't go to c5 because it gets taken, so white will have a 2 pawns advantage. However, the best move by black is actually knight to c5. According to the engine, there's nothing else to do. The idea, of course, of the engine is that once we take back, we have these 2 ugly double out and isolated pawns. Now the queen can't take the pawn because of the knight in d7, and retreating to c7 doesn't work because of bishop to e3. And after finally long castle for black, white continues with the stunning move bishop to e6, keeping the pin, but most importantly preventing the e pawn from moving, and also stopping the rook from going to the square g8 potentially. A move like king to b8, just to make an example, is met by rook to d1, which indicates how much pressure there is on d7, so it's a waste of time for black, because he'll be forced to go back. And another move, let's say for example g6, the idea of finally developing the bishop in g7 and maybe the rook in f8 looks very good. White continues with rook to b1. Excellent move, because it puts pressure on b7, stopping the queen right where she is in c7. She can't move away because of the queen b7 checkmate threat. So for example, bishop g7 will lose immediately to bishop f4. We're giving away a bishop, but we're setting the square free, b7 free, for checkmate, so the queen can't take, and this cannot be stopped. The knight is pinned, so the knight can't block. The bishop can't block because you can just take it for free, and if the queen moves away, you can take it because of the rook b8 square. So take, and then this move checkmate. Back in this position, we went through queen c7. We explained why queen obviously cannot take in c5. So you'd be arguing, why not simply knight takes c5? Okay, then white continues with castling and the idea of playing bishop to a3. The thing is that this queen stops the black plan of castling short side, and this bishop stops the king from castling queen side. This position is evaluated plus 520 or something, so that is why knight c5 was also a terrible move. If you're wondering what happens after e6 attacking the queen, defended by 2 pieces. Well, simply rook e1, it's extremely obvious. And there's just too much pressure on e6. Of course, the pawn is pinned, and after king f7, unpinning it, well, now bishop check is happening, and the queen can't take back because of the rook. So after knight takes, incredible move, rook b1, attacking the queen. If queen takes rook, you have a checkmate in e6, and if queen moves away, well, either way, you have this move, and the game plays itself. After e4, c6, knight c3, d5, knight f3, black can play the early knight f6 move. So we're still continuing e5 and knight e4. So on this line, as we've seen in the previous video, we have to play knight e2 and not trade. The threat is to play d3 and make this knight go around the board in a very silly way. So let's keep looking a little bit more at bishop g4. We attack it immediately, and previously we went through bishop takes and everything that happens next. What happens after bishop h5? Now here we can play a bunch of forced moves. g4 attacks the bishop, bishop is forced to g6, and now d3 attacking the knight is forced to c5. Black now plays knight f4, keeping an eye on this bishop. As soon as black will be able to, will decide to move the h pawn, we can take the bishop with themes that we have seen in so many other Caro-Kann videos. So to develop more understanding about this, feel free to watch all of the other videos that I've published about the Caro-Kann. So if black plays e6 at this point, in order to develop the bishop, the black player will not be able to develop the bishop from the fianchetto. So after e6, white continues with c3 to start building a pawn chain, and also because d4 might have been annoying to meet. So c3 is putting double attack over d4, which is not something to underestimate. Anyway, after bishop to e7, white continues with h4. There was nowhere else to place the bishop, no other way to develop it because of the very silly knight in c5. So after h4, we're threatening to trap the bishop. So now black has to push the pawn, let's say h6. Of course, f6 is not possible to get the bishop to go to f7 because the only defender of the square e6 is the knight, so you can play b4. And when the knight moves, knight e6 becomes incredibly strong. And you cannot really play pawn takes e5 with an attack on the knight, because after pawn takes e5, you can first take the bishop with an attack on the rook, and when you get taken back, then you win a piece for free in c5. So after h6, now you can take the bishop, obviously, because in take back, now you can play b4, attacking the knight will have to move. So after knight d7, now white plays d4. We have crucial attack over the square c5, so black cannot play the usual c5 because you'd be taking it for free, there's no compensation or anything. So after castling, white is on easy street, bishop pair, and no possibility for the black player to infiltrate anywhere. White continues with bishop d3, targeting the weak pawn, and now black can't really push the pawn in g, for instance, because after trading everything, you'll have a rook on an open file. If black defends the pawn in g6 with the queen, white will play rook h3. The idea of playing queen to c2 as well to increase the pressure, and then king e2, and after developing the last bishop, white will double up the rooks. This plan cannot be avoided, the center is completely closed, as you can see. If black tries to find some counterattack on the queen side, let's say a5, this looks like the most natural move, the idea of taking and developing the rook. White ignores it and plays queen to c2, double attack on the pawn. This pawn cannot be defended again, also because king h7. Also here you have ideas of like knight g5 check, pawn takes and can take back, the king is forced back, and bishop g6, you're gonna rook on an open file. It's fantastic, and if they don't take you, then you can play knight e6. It's an amazing position. So what happens if, for example, in this position black takes the pawn, right, to get the rook out? Now we can take the pawn in g6, and after the queen moves back, white continues with knight g5, amazing move that proves a point. This knight is trying to go to e6. If he gets taken, let's go through this so we illustrate, and then we can close. So we illustrate the plan and we can close the video. We can take back, and there's already nothing to do here because you're threatening bishop h7, king moves, then king f7, queen g6. If the king goes to h8, I mean, this is happening no matter what. How can black possibly stop it? If bishop takes in g5 here, there's double attack on g5, so it's safe to take the idea of maybe retreating, bringing the queen in the game or something. Then it's just too late. Bishop check, and now king f7. You can just play queen g6 here, then take the bishop afterwards, and there's going to be a disaster if instead the king goes to h8. Now simply take the bishop, that comes with an attack on the queen. So after queen g5, bishop f5 check, king moves, and now bishop takes e6. Only move is rook blocks, and now rook h5. Whatever the queen does, let's say queen f4 to put more protection over the rook, to save itself from the rook, from the white rook, and to attack f2, put pressure on f2. Either way, white plays rook to f5. So now it's game over. If black tries one last cheeky attempt of playing queen to h2 with an idea of making a skewer or something, white simply plays king e2 to stop all of that from happening.